I'm fortunate the camera likes me, so it makes politics a little bit easier.
Yeah, you are good with the camera. You lucky son of a bitch.
Yeah, I know. It's just, but I'm trying to use it for good.
Okay, that's good. Hey, howdy and aloha, everybody. This is James with Montauk. Listen, we have some cool people that come on the show all the time to give their opinions. They rant and rave. They get the perspectives. Me on Montauk, I'm about my core is just taking care of saving the planet and all of its inhabitants. But every once in a while, like I say, we have a special guest that will come on. And me, I'm a Green Party member now, and I'm a registered Green. And I'm very proud to be proud, green, and full of the green power. And tonight, with me right now, I have a Mr. Mike Feinstein, who is the actual co-founder, the joint co-founder of the Green Party of California. He's a former Santa Monica mayor and city council member who's now running for the Secretary of State of California in 2018. Mike, how are you doing? What's going on, man?
Great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be on your program.
It's great. It's great for you to come here. So what's happening? What's going on? Where are you at right now, bro?
So I'm in Pasadena right now, actually, at their beautiful city hall. That's kind of the background here.
Oh, I see
and
that. That's cool.
I chose this location in part because I'm running for Secretary of State, and I'm running to try and increase democracy in California. And I've been actually going to a lot of city councils, and I go during the public comment period, and I talk to them about my plan for proportional representation for the state legislature. And that gives me an opportunity to go directly to people who are in power, like city council members, and people who are active in their communities, the people who go to city council meetings, the people who watch city council meetings because they're on cable TV. I think a lot of people are familiar that the coverage of politics in Sacramento has really been decreased over the years as newspapers don't have a lot of resources, etc. So you think, how do you get your message out? And I'm actually using community-based broadcasting in different cities to go and pitch to pitch my ware to them. So that's why
you're taking out several birds with one stone. That's impressive.
Now, of course, I'm a nonviolent vegan, but I know your point.
I didn't say bird. Did I say bird? Okay.
Anyway. You did, but the point is, yes, there's a lot of synergy here. And so, you think about synergy and you think about representation, and part of what we want to have in our government is a government that looks like all the people in California and brings all of the points of view to the table. Then you're going to have synergy. If you only have a couple of points of view, which is our current situation because you need big money to get elected and a lot of other problems with their system, then you don't really have synergy. You don't have solutions that work for the whole society. They only work for part of the society. Remember when we had the Occupy movement a couple of years ago, that was dealing with top-down structures and the fact that political power was in the hands of very few hands at the expense of everybody else. So my campaign, in part, is to try and change that. And one of the ways that we can actually change that is to change how we elect people to the state legislature. And I'll go into that more as we talk.
And that's the great thing about what you're doing is the current process is prehistoric, and it favors the elite.
Yes, it does.
It doesn't favor the people, which is sad.
The United States, our form of government is a carryover from the English colonial days. And there's only a small number of countries that use our single seat, winner take all district election system. A lot of other countries who even had that got rid of it. Other countries, like, for example, South Africa, when they came out of apartheid, they looked at the US system and they specifically said, that's what we don't want. And New Zealand, which used to have our system, conducted a national process and looked at what they had and decided to go also to proportional representation. So what does that mean? What does proportional representation mean?
Yeah, you got the other day at the Irvine, it was great. I should have live streamed it. You were spot on fire with that, and you looked really good in your suit, by the way.
Well, thank you. My mother would be happy to hear that.
But can you summarize that and how the proportional representation, please?
What it means is, let's say that 20% of the people share a set of values and perspectives, of political perspectives. Okay. They should win 20% of the seats. and they should have 20% of the representatives. In our current system, you get 51% and 49% gets no representation. So if we think that there is wisdom inherent in the diversity in our society, that everybody's got a little bit of piece of the larger truth, and we all have perspectives that have to be heard and incorporated, both for democracy sense and the fact that we want to learn from each other, well, that way you get everybody to have a seat at the table. So instead of electing one candidate at a time in an individual seat district, instead you elect several at a time with several people in a district. And then again, if one party wins 20% of the vote, then they win 20% of the seats. And most of the countries that we're compared to actually do the elections that way. When you think about California, we have this amazing 21st century diverse world society, all sorts of perspectives, all sorts of points of view, but our political system doesn't put them at the table. So our state legislature also, here's the crazy thing. You know when the size of our legislature was set?
When?
Yeah. Can you guess when, like how many people, we have 40 people in the state Senate, 80 people in the state assembly. Right. When do you think that was established?
When muskets were around?
Right. 1879. Now, the population of the state in 1879 was only 865,000 people.
Okay.
Today we have 40 million. So we have more people, 1 million people per state Senate district than we had in the whole state when we set the size. What does that do? What it does is it makes it more expensive to run for office because you have these giant districts that have tons of people. It's very expensive. And that means the people who control politics are the people who can make the donations to put those people in office. So often we hear, oh, we shouldn't have a larger legislature because that's going to be more politicians. That's a scam on the voters. We should have more elected officials so that we have more representation and so that the state legislature can actually look like the diversity of California. So the first step is to have a larger state legislature, and I'm recommending a 500-person state legislature. And then we use the proportional
which is more proportional.
Yeah, I mean, instead of having 500 single-seat districts, what we would have, half of them would be 250 smaller single-seat districts, and this is how New Zealand and Germany do it. And then the other half would be elected by proportional representation, where, again, 20% of the people can elect 20% of the seats. And instead of having, and this is the really kind of cool California thing, California is a nation state, and we're a state of regions. And there's, the Central Valley, the Bay Area. There's different areas that are large. SoCal, there's macroeconomic, environmental, transportation regions. And yet we don't have public policy debates going on those regions. So what I'm suggesting is divide California into 8 large regions, and in each of those, you have a proportional representation election. You remember how there were some people a couple of years ago saying that we should divide California into 3 states?
Right.
So
rather than a succession thing.
Yeah, this is, and I don't think that, secession from the United States is one thing, which I also don't support, but people who wanted to divide California into 3 states because they felt like their parts of the state weren't being heard. Right. It doesn't make sense to divide our state into different states because there's this wonderful coordination that we have right now by being one state, but it does make sense to bring the regional perspectives into Sacramento, and we're missing that. So I'm running essentially 500-seat legislature, half the seats from smaller single-seat districts by ranked choice voting, which we can also go into, and then half the seats by proportional representation. So here's an issue, for example.
Okay.
For students, and how would a proportional representation system like this change politics in the state? We've had this debate for several years about how the educational system is too expensive. You go to college, you end up being incarcerated by debt for all your life.
Forever.
And the young students who are the victims of that system, which is essentially a tax on younger working class students, young kids of color, because we don't have a fair tax system and we're shifting the cost of education from the state to the students. But then in that environment, what we've had for years, students going to Sacramento, and they're trying to lobby the existing state legislators to better fund education. What if those students actually were elected to Sacramento? Now, on the 6 o'clock news, you've got these young students representing a lot of Californians who are in the legislature, they're talking about those issues directly. And what happens is the 18 to 29-year-olds who turn out the least right now, they would now see somebody like them talking about their issues directly.
For
they would
their future. For their
future.
future.
Exactly. And they would turn out in higher numbers.
Not missing it like most of us, like we did.
Right. And they would turn out in higher numbers. So now sure. We talk about, and this is one of the differences between myself and the incumbent, Alex Padilla. Alex Padilla has worked on some changes to make it easier to vote, but not about giving people more reason to vote. Oh. Countries that have proportional representation have 70 to 95% turnout of all eligible voters. We have a 30 to 60% of the registered voters, which itself is only a fraction of the eligible voters. And that's part of our whole crazy system here in the United States, where we have just two choices because it's a winner-take-all single-seat district, which produces two large parties. We get stuck in the lesser of evil, and whenever you vote for the lesser of evil, if you keep doing that every time, you end up with the evil of two lessers. And what is the evil of two lessers now? Donald Trump.
Yeah, so you still end up with a big pile of crap, bottom line.
Yeah, and because that's a result of people getting frustrated with a lack of choice, where in a proportional representation system, not only would we have Democrats and Republicans in the legislature, we'd have Greens, we'd have Peace and Freedom, we'd have Libertarians, we'd have American Independent, and the diversity in the state. Right, everybody has
in their region. There could be Libertarians in the. Right. I know there's going to be a bunch of up in like Stockton. I'll tell you right now.
Yes, and part of the reason that these regional elections, these 8 regional proportional representation elections make sense is you will have different mixes in different parts of the state, different people, different political orientations, and everybody has a right to have representation in our state.
Right. So I drew a little pie. I don't know if you can see this.
Okay.
It's a pie.
Hope this is a vegan pie.
Yes, it's all vegan. It has there is no meat. And no dairy products.
Great.
So if you see the pie, you can see that in the larger piece of the pie, there's more people.
Yep.
Can you see it? And then the smaller, there's one person. Is that proportional representation or good?
Yeah. Yes, it is. You nailed it. Okay. You nailed it. Right.
Okay.
Excellent.
So with that being said,
CNN.
That's the way it fits in this brain, buddy. So here's the thing. What the biggest question I'm seeing from this, and this is the biggest question. So proportional representation represents each region. So if you're in a region of a bunch of people in LA, do they get what they want just for LA, even though it affects the entire state?
Right. So what would happen? Like, okay, say you're in LA. Right. We have this 500-seat legislature, and the number of seats from each region is proportional to the population in that region.
Yeah. So, LA would probably be just like 60.
Well, so the region that I'm proposing would combine LA, Orange, and Ventura counties. So there'd be 3 together. Okay. And with the population of those 3, there'd be 181 seats from that area.
Oh, you've got this all done. Yeah.
There's
you know what? You put this in that paper that you passed out.
That's right. That's right.
I'll post that. I took a picture of that. I'll post it later.
Great. Those regions correspond to the California Department of Labor regions, and they also correspond to something called municipal planning organizations, which I'll talk about in a second because it's a really cool connection here. But basically, so in that area, you'd have 91 individual, much smaller single-seat districts, and then you'd have 90 proportional representation. So out of those 90, what would happen is you would have some Democrats, some Republicans, some Greens, some Peace and Freedom, some Libertarians, et cetera, reflecting the diversity in the region. And then what happens is, since we're talking about regional planning issues, for example, in those kind of elections, now people who have different perspectives on that question all are going into Sacramento. So all of us in the greater LA area would have some people going. So you have 2 votes essentially in that system. One, you vote in your individual single seat district. Mm-hmm. Then you have a party vote for the proportional representation seats. So individual district, maybe there's 5 or 6 candidates. You use ranked choice voting. You can rank those choices in the order of your preference. And then if your first choice doesn't win, it goes to your second and third choice until somebody has a majority. So that's for 1 seat. Mm-hmm. And then the proportional representation side, you cast it. So say you're a Green, I'm a Green, we vote Green Party. The Green Party gets 10% of the vote in the greater LA region.
Okay, could you get the last part? You kind of fizzed out.
Yeah. What happens is, so you vote for your single seat district. That's
Right.
your individual district vote, and then you have a party vote. So you're a Green, I'm a Green. Say we vote Green Party there, and the Green Party wins 10% of the vote. Then it gets 10% of those 90 proportional representation seats, or 9 seats.
Okay, and so we're winning. So it's okay. I totally get it. Now, in regards to all this, there's the biggest question, and you know it's going to be thrown at you from both sides of the aisle, from the Dumbocrats, and I'm not talking about the people, and the Republicans, and I'm not talking about the voting Republic.
Ouch.
I'm talking about the people that are currently in power, Dumbocrats and Republicans. They're going to throw this at, how are you going to make all this happen? And is it going to be more complicated, or is it going to cost a lot of money? You know, they'll do anything they can to throw a wrench in your machine.
Sure. So, first of all, we always have to go back to the point that we're a diverse nation state and everybody deserves a seat at the table. So when anybody is attacking this kind of idea, we always have to go back and say, oh, you don't want all the diversity of the state to have representation? So that's number one. Number two, this would happen probably through the initiative process. I am conducting a petition campaign on my FeinsteinforSOS.org website. Actually, when you go to the homepage, you click on there, there's a petition that sends a letter to your state senator and your state assembly member to ask them to put proportional representation on the ballot. But let's say that they don't. My campaign, to the degree that I get more and more votes, is a signal to the elected people in California and overall to the people in California that more people want this kind of representation. Mm-hmm. So my campaign is a first step to generate the interest on this kind of change. Okay. In the long term, yes, we're probably going to need a ballot measure. We're probably going to need to put it on the ballot as a vote of the people. It is a constitutional amendment, right, but it would be a great one. Now, you mentioned
you got to sell this thing, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I mean, but the nice thing is, what I found in my campaign is when I have a chance to expose these ideas to people from all walks of life, they like the idea of a more inclusive democracy. So in some ways it sells itself if you can get out there and talk. So you mentioned the Republicans and the Democrats. Let's take each of them. The Republicans are disappearing in our current system. Actually, they would be wise to support proportional representation, and they would end up probably being somewhere in the 20 to 35% of the vote. Republicans would probably break up a bit, and some more votes would go to the Libertarians, some would go to the American Independent, but that would be the center right, and they would have representation according to their numbers where they are being disappeared in our current system. But now let's take the center left. Here in California, there's a civil war between the Bernie-crats and the other Democrats. And it's happening district after district, big fight at the Democratic state meetings, yada, 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 yada.
Yeah.
Instead of doing a civil war in a party with people who don't want you, if you're a Bernie-crat under proportional representation, you would just win seats directly. You'd have your own party. You'd either join the Green Party, the Peace and Freedom Party, you'd start your own New People's Party or Progressive Party, right. And the reality is you would win representation in your numbers. So actually there's a whole lot of Democrats, people who are Democrat in name, but are frustrated with where the party goes, who instead of spending the next 30 years of their life trying to fight those civil wars, district by district, right, they could just have representation tomorrow. So in reality, there's a whole lot of people who would actually do better under a proportional representation system than we do today. And then the other thing is, again, large single seat winner take all districts means that the people who get elected have to go to the big donors because it's so expensive to get elected. Right. But if you only need 5% of the vote to gain seats, and that's the bottom threshold in this sort of system. If a party wins at least 5%, then they win representation. Now you're campaigning directly to people who already agree with you, and you don't need as much money because it's a platform-based dynamic, and people say, yeah, I identify with that party. I'm going to vote for them. So proportional representation actually lowers the cost of running for office.
Wow.
While increasing the representation.
Kind of gets rid of the whole Citizens United
Yeah, yeah,
idea.
it's a great way around it, because even though we need to change federal law and overturn those crazy Supreme Court rulings,
Yeah.
short of getting there by lowering the cost of elections, we make it easier for grassroots voices to be heard. And then one of the other things that I'm running on for Secretary of State is to have forms of public financing together with lowering the election threshold. So, for example, remember Bernie Sanders talked about give $27 and average donation like that. So there are public matching funds programs where donations up to $25 or up to $35 are then matched on a multiple basis, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 5-to-1, etc. If somebody gave you $250, only the first $25 would be matched. What we're doing there then is we are encouraging and supporting a broader grassroots base of public financing of grassroots people funding our elections. And then together with that, we own the public airwaves. So why don't we actually provide more information to voters? Right now, you're a voter, you're sitting at home, and you get most of your information from expensive mailers that only the most financially backed candidates can afford to do.
I get it from Rachel Maddow. That's where I get all my
And you get it from Rachel Maddow. Okay, then why not? We have something called the California Channel here in California. It's our C-SPAN. Why don't we have free TV time for all the candidates who qualify for the ballot, so that, see, this is a voters' rights issue. It's not about candidates. It's about you as a voter. You have the right to have information about every candidate and ballot measure that is before you in the election. That's your civic right. And we need to fund that sort of thing. So that's another thing that I'm campaigning on. And together, when you mix proportional representation and forms of public financing together, now you empower the voices, the diversity of California.
That is, the whole process seems like the whole entire country needs this process. This would be a good business model for damn sure. Here's a big question though.
Yeah.
When you're doing this, is the first step, what is the first step? Like, hey, I'm in office now, guys. Thank you very much. Green Party, Secretary of State. What am I doing? What is your first thing?
So the Secretary of State actually does sponsor legislation, does need the legislators to pick it up, but the Secretary of State herself or himself actually often sponsors legislation. So let's assume that I'm elected. We get to November, I'm moving up to Sacramento, and I'm going to be serving in office. If I win as a Green, such an enormous signal to the California legislature that, wow, the people voted for that platform. So I would introduce a process for proportional representation, but what we would want to do is have an inclusive public process where we take input from people all over the state on different models of how we can empower the voters more. So I would have the legislature establish essentially a group of grassroots people from around the state where the experts and the politicians would come to regular people. You think about how juries are put together. We could be drawing for a committee of residents from around California from the grassroots and have them convene public hearings around the state, hearing from experts on different electoral systems, and then come up with recommendations and put them on the ballot for a public vote. So I would go with that kind of inclusive public process, and we would look at very deeply at models of proportional representation.
That's freaking fantastic. I can't be in the jury because one of my best friends that I used to party with is now, this guy used to beer bong tequila. That's all I have to say. And now he's a senior district attorney in Santa Ana. And
you know what? He deserves representation.
And I'm telling you, the guy can party like a rock star. But anyway, so I've been to jury duty. If anybody knows anybody in the halls of this building that works here, that's going to be in the courtrooms, let us know. And I raised my hand and I said, just Ben, he was just over at my house. We were working on his truck the other day or something like that. And he goes, are you talking about Blasey Blah? I shouldn't have said his name, but are you talking about Blasey Blah? And I go, yeah, and he goes, you need to go now. he goes, "You're good. Go. You don't have to be here." It's good to have those kind of strings and pull it
Look,
when you're in the courts.
what's the old thing about, I don't want to, something about a party and a revolution and dancing. I don't remember what exactly it was, but you got to have some fun in politics as well.
Exactly. What I find totally interesting about all this is that from when they had muskets, right? 18, what did you say?
Oh, 1879 is when we set the size of the California
They set the
legislature.
size and we kept it the same way. Do you believe that there were some people that started to understand how they could take advantage of that process?
Well, at that time,
Was it intentional? Do you think where we are now was intentional on the gerrymandering and the way it's working now and all that?
I do want to touch on a gerrymandering a bit, but let's say if we're talking about the size of the legislature, the reality is, who knew in 1879 when there was 875,000 people here, 865,000 people here, that we were going to grow? I think that most people knew that we would grow this much. So what should have happened probably is there should have been some sort of escalator to say every 20 or 30 years that the size of the legislature would increase as the population does. If I had been at that constitutional convention in 1879, I would have said that. It didn't happen. So I don't think this was intentional at the time, but now that we've grown, the fact that we haven't enlarged the size of our state legislature or frankly the US Congress, it's also an absurd situation with so few people for so many, so few representatives for so many people. Let me touch on one thing in the news today and how proportional representation. Just yesterday was that horrifying shooting by a white supremacist trained young kid in Florida, and 17 people were killed. So we hear polls where 85% of the people in the country want gun safety laws, better gun safety laws, so that we keep guns out of the hands of people who really shouldn't be having them, who are likely to be killing other people. It's insane. Well, why don't we have that change? We always hear about the influence of the NRA, and the NRA does put in a whole lot of money, but that's in this system of single seat, winner-take-all districts that are drawn and gerrymandered, as you said. So the reality is most of the people who are in there are in safe seats. If we went to a proportional representation system and 80% of the people felt a certain way about an issue, then the reality is we are likely to have a supermajority of the people who are elected to be holding that position where the public has. We don't have that today. Our current electoral system is not giving us representatives who represent where the people are on this terrible issue on gun safety, or let's say DACA. We hear that 85% of the people want there to be some sort of solution for the DACA youth. So under a proportional representation election system, views that are widely held in the society would be widely held in the legislature, and we would get public policy. So we could react to a crisis like this when right now we're not, because the system isn't letting us do it.
It's all ridiculous. So here's the biggest national example. 70% of the people in the United States, the voting republic, by the way, who I love, want single payer.
Yes.
But it's not happening. So with this proportional representation,
it could. And let's look. I was involved in the 1994 single payer effort in California. I was a coordinator for Proposition 186 on the west side of Los Angeles. And we lost that one when it went to the ballot 63-37. Now imagine we had proportional representation since then. What would have happened then is the legislature on that platform. And if indeed it's a popular point of view, then more and more of them would have gotten elected over the years, and there already would have been a majority elected in the legislature to make that kind of change, because that's what the people would have voted for. Where now, again, you're lobbying people who don't necessarily share the position of where the public is at.
Yeah, it's perfectly said. They're just not working for us anymore.
And the thing is, it's easy to be critical of politicians and say they don't represent the people, but our current system, these are people who are taking advantage of the current system. And large expensive districts to run in mean that the money is what determines who gets in, not as much of where the people are at. If you lower the cost to get elected, then you're going to have a more representative democracy. So in some ways, it's easy to say, oh, the Democrats sell out, the Republicans sell out. These are people who are working in a flawed system. And most of the countries that we're compared to, the 25 or so that are in the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, that started in the early 70s. That includes the Western European countries, Japan, the US, etc. Most of those countries have abandoned the winner-take-all single-seat district system and have gone to proportional representation. And going back to single-payer and Bernie Sanders' campaign, Bernie Sanders, a lot of the social-oriented programs that he talked about happen in countries that have proportional representation. So there's no coincidence there. The union movements are stronger in those countries, and there's just so many things that are more possible in a proportional representation system than we have right now. And therefore, for a lot of progressives who put a lot of time and effort into trying to take back the Democratic Party, a lot of that energy, and I don't dishonor people who try and make the best within the current system, but really we need system change. And system change would provide us with a more inclusive democracy.
Okay, I got to say, I am just happy as a clam that there's something that's going to happen that should help. These are simple words, but it just should help the current process right now. And if we can get somebody to get close to that message, so that gets me to my next question. Then I have somebody from the galley, I call it, the people that are in the live chat. And by the way, you'll be able to see these live chat comments and remarks and whatever the hell they're saying out there. They're talking about arugula right now, some of them, but you'll be able to see that on the YouTube, and you'll be able to go back and forth through it. But my question is, at this time, if you do get to a certain point, is your goal to, and I'm just saying this because I'm trying to be real, if you don't get the nod, let's just say you don't get the nod, but you get a lot of people that support what you're doing, you believe, and I think this is your goal, part of your goal is that you believe that you're at least getting that, planting that seed throughout the country, throughout the state, and maybe some other candidates may even bring it up because others in California, the voting republic, is starting to understand the value of how that can benefit them. Is that part of your plan as well?
Exactly right. Or como se dicen en español, sembramos la semilla. We're planting the seed.
There you
exactly. Go. And again, when I've been going to city council meetings and speaking to different city councils with very different demographics from around the state, it is exposing people to the idea that things could be different. We could do it differently. And let's think of another vexing issue that this could address. We talked how it lowers the cost of elections, so it's a form of campaign finance reform. It also deals with gerrymandering. Right. By design, when you only have one seat up for grabs, how you draw the district matters for everything. But even so, there's only one winner, even if you draw supposedly a competitive district. But competitive isn't necessarily representative either. What about the people who don't win? So if you have a multi-seat district and everybody wins seats proportionally according to their number, voila, you're done with gerrymandering. It doesn't matter anymore because in every district. So this is one of the interesting things about where the Democrats, because they have a supermajority in California, should be acting while they have that power, because they won't have it forever.
Right.
If we went ahead and put proportional representation on the ballot in California, if the Democrats did, and I believe they'd have some support with Republicans as well, then this is a sign to the whole rest of the country, which is being torn apart by gerrymandering, the solution, because here's the difficulty with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, especially Justice Kennedy, who's the swing vote on this issue, he says that he agrees that there's partisan gerrymandering going on, especially in this Wisconsin case where the Republicans get 50% of the vote and over 60% of the seats. But he wants an objective standard to say, well, when is it gerrymandering? Is it when you combine 75% of say, Democrats into one district and they win 75 to 25 and now there's all those wasted votes?
Right.
Well, maybe that's objectively true. But is 65 to 35 too much? Is 57 to 43 too much? There's no clarity. There's no objective standard about what gerrymandering is. So the answer really is proportional representation. So that would be an incredible thing here that we could do from California for leadership for the rest of the country.
Nobody really sees the plotted diagrams that are created anyway, but they're very, I've seen a few videos on YouTube's and I've seen it on Redacted Tonight with Lee Camp and pieces of Jimmy Dore and a few other people out there. But it just seems like if you're going to be using something that pulls out what you want, right? What you want as, not as the voting republic. These people are pulling out in gerrymandering. They're pulling out what the elite want, what the corporations want. They're going after these votes designed to get what they want, to get their person in their office, just so it'll take care of the corporate elite. I call it the two-party oligarchy. Can I get you that question real quick? And it was from His name is David. It's from a show, another YouTube called Independent Outsider. What are your main criticisms of the Secretary of State of California, Alex Padilla? That's one. It's a two-part. And what do you think of proposed Safe at Home program? I don't know if you've heard of that.
I don't know about the latter one, but I'll give 2 points on Secretary of State Padilla where I disagree.
Throw a little dirt out here. You got to throw a little dirt.
Look, I'm campaigning on issues, and in a good political system, you have a fair debate on issues. And here's 2 of them that I disagree with him strongly.
Okay.
The first one is I'm proposing a constitutional amendment so that the Secretary of State cannot endorse, oppose, or otherwise take a position on any candidate or ballot measure while he or she is Secretary of State because of the perception of a conflict of interest in how the elections are run. Now, many of us are familiar with what happened in Florida in 2000. Katherine Harris, who was the Republican Secretary of State that helped to facilitate a lot of the voter suppression, she was George Bush's campaign manager. Bush ends up with a small few hundred votes more, is awarded the presidency by the Supreme Court. She had a conflict of interest. In Ohio in 2004, there were some similar issues there. And who was the campaign manager for George Bush in Ohio in 2004? The Republican Secretary of State again. So that's a big problem. Now we come to California in 2016, and a lot of the Bernie-crats who wanted to vote in the Democratic Party primary for Bernie Sanders, but hadn't been Democrats before. A lot of them, some people changed to Democrat, but others were what's called no party preference in California, which is a misleading term, but it's for those people who aren't registered in any of the ballot qualified parties. Those folk, we have widespread anecdotal evidence that many of those people were not told how to go ahead and get a Democratic ballot in order to vote for Bernie Sanders. So there was a lot of people who didn't end up voting for Bernie Sanders because it wasn't clear to them how they get that kind of ballot. They weren't told about that option when they got to the voting booth.
Wow.
That responsibility is the responsibility of the Secretary of State. And who did the Secretary of State endorse in 2016? Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton.
He was campaigning for Hillary Clinton at the same time.
Isn't that such a coincidence?
And the thing is, you know what? I'm not in Mr. Padilla's head, but I can say that from the outside, there's
not that stupid.
Well, it's the perception.
He's not an idiot.
So it's not okay. So that's number one.
Okay. That is not okay.
I'm proposing a constitutional amendment so that the Secretary of State could never do that again. That's number one.
Oh,
now let's take another issue, and this is one where the Secretary of State had helped to co-sponsor a bill. We just passed, our state legislature moved our presidential primary from June to March. And not only did it move the presidential primary, but all the other state legislature, Congress, et cetera, has been moved to March.
Right.
Now, that was done. The Secretary of State said, this is done to give California more voice. But when you move up a presidential primary that is the most expensive party, expensive primary in the country, California, 21 million registered voters, 25 million eligible voters, 11 major media markets. It's a fortune. What you're doing now is you're rewarding big money at the expense of grassroots campaigns.
Right.
So rather than serving California and working people in California, what's happening is it's only going to promote the candidates who have early money. So what would I have done if I was Secretary of State? And here's the difference, really. You put in a green in office like this.
Right.
The bill that went to the California legislature should have been a 2-year bill rather than a 1-year bill. And then what I would have done as Secretary of State, and I would have asked the governor to go with me, is to convene an interstate compact process where we sit on C-SPAN with the secretaries of state from dozens of other states, and we talk about coordinating a national coordinated system of presidential primaries that has many primaries from low population and diverse states in the beginning. So you give grassroots candidates a chance to fire. They get their voice, they can campaign on that level, and then they start building up the small donations to be ready when you come to California. The reason I said a 2-year bill is if we got no cooperation from other states, then in year 2, we could have passed such a law and said, look, we tried to get coordination with other states. They didn't do it. C'est la vie. But that didn't happen. That would have been progressive leadership.
Right.
Then when the primary finally came to California, we would have a selection of candidates for California voters that actually represented the diversity of points of view in California. So our Secretary of State, I believe, failed working people in California for pushing that kind of legislation, and I would have done it differently. And imagine how interesting that C-SPAN process would have been, to have secretaries of states from different states all debating how we can fix the presidential primary system. We work with other states on climate change, other states on public safety, democracy. That's what I would have helped to lead on.
They could do it on this platform. I can get up to 50 people. I can get 50 people on here. We can do it. We can do it on here.
Well, you know,
like
even though it's
table.
No, I mean, look, even though it's too late to do this for 2020, it's not too late to do it for 2024. And if I am elected Secretary of State, I would convene such a process. So those are two really substantial. I don't believe in the Secretary of State having a conflict of interest and putting, and then the same thing here with these presidential primaries. It was a fiasco to make that sort of.
Yeah. And everybody, and I mean everybody, felt the pain of that. Okay, so there's one thing that I think you brought up at the Irvine meeting that I think I did a cartwheel when you started talking about it.
Yes.
Do you remember what that was, Mike?
I do. So, and actually, funny, this is another place where I disagree with the Secretary of State on, which I'll get to. The election day. Why isn't the election day a public holiday?
Hello.
So, if we want working people to be able to vote, then we should make it easy for working people to be able to vote by making the election day a holiday. Now, what has happened instead of doing that? And this is really interesting. We've done these other things. We have vote by mail. They open the polls early in some places, 10 days beforehand. And all that might sound good, and it's not necessarily bad in itself, but these are the wrong way of getting at the root of the problem. The root of the problem at first is that election day isn't an easy day to vote. And why is it a problem then when people are voting earlier? The problem is an election campaign is a debate on issues, and it goes up until election day. Now, I've campaigned, I've been elected a couple times to my city council in Santa Monica, and imagine that you're a city council candidate in your town, you're a school board candidate, you're going door to door, you're grassroots thing, you want to meet voters, and then you get to the door of somebody and they said, "Hi, nice to meet you. I already voted 3 weeks ago." So number one, what early voting does is it rewards people who have early money, who can afford to pay for direct mail campaigning early on. Grassroots candidate for your school board ends up being
every media platform there's out there. If you got big money, you can get on anything.
And the earlier you have it favors big money that already is there. It's harder for grassroots campaigns to have early money. So that means if we're encouraging people to vote earlier instead of on election day, we're rewarding big money, and we're stifling grassroots voices, and we're stifling public debate. You remember there was a special election in Montana maybe 6 months ago that the Republican candidate punched a journalist the night before the election.
Yeah.
Well, that was too late.
It's too late. Couldn't do anything about that. I remember that.
Ready.
What also happens real quick is the issues change, the narrative can change as well.
Yes.
So you may have a totally different narrative or talking points by the time your day off comes to vote, right? Your day off, which, I'm going surfing, just saying.
So I mean, it just undermines the idea of the public debate that is the basis of a democratic process, an election process, because you're shortening the time period in which people actually get to debate those issues. It's crazy. So in the end, sure, we can also make it easy to vote before Election Day, but we should make Election Day sacred. It should be a holiday for everyone. And I would make the voting booths open until 10 at night, because there are people, public safety personnel, people who are in restaurants, etc., who work on days that are holidays.
I work in a restaurant. I get it. Exactly.
Right. And we should be starting with that. Now, here's a place where I also disagree with the Secretary of State. Secretary of State sponsored a bill a couple of years ago that would now have what are called voting centers. And voting centers means that your county has a choice to get rid of precinct-based voting, and instead you would have voting centers scattered around the county, and you can vote anywhere. And what the Secretary of State supports is that counties that want to upgrade their voting equipment would get matching funds from the state if they agree to go to voting centers. Right. Now, that idea by itself, there are pros and cons to it, but what should we really be incentivizing with public money? I believe what we should be incentivizing integrity, so that people can truly trust the results of the election. And one of the ways you do that is you make sure that your software and voting equipment is not proprietary, owned by a company, so that nobody knows how the votes are counted except for that company. Instead, there is an option called open source, where the code that is behind all of your voting equipment is publicly owned, publicly available. Anybody can check it out. Anybody can run the election results. That sort of system gives us, we need to treat the election infrastructure like a utility, like a public utility. It's a public asset. So I would support that counties that need to upgrade their voting equipment, and many counties in California need to, what I would support first is counties that want to go to open source technology. San Francisco has a task force. They're looking at how to do it there, and they're probably going to be the first county in the state. They're going to do it on their own, but I think we need to support that from the state level, from the Secretary of State's level. They should come up with a template open source system that counties could adopt, and I would promote that as well. And that's another difference between myself and the Secretary of State.
This is all fantastic stuff. I just really hope that the seeds that we plant, that's probably another good question. It's just things just pop in my head, Mike. They just come up in my head. When that seed is planted, is there a way that we can keep it watered in another sense, or keep it in keep the narrative out there? Do you know what I'm saying?
It's really
even let's just say, for some crazy, strange, stupid, ridiculous reason, there's a meteor or a giant, don't say earthquake, I fucking said it, but anyway, you can, it's PG-13 by the way on here, and something happens when you're not the Secretary of State. Is there a way we can keep pushing this and keep bringing it up?
Well, I think the appeal of having an inclusive democracy is taking hold. The seed is planted, it is growing in the state. And what's important, like one of the things that really needs to happen is the political punditry, for example, in the state, when we look at issues that seem to be irreconcilable, because you have one large party fighting the other large party, our dynamic in DC, for example, we should be talking about, well, if we had proportional representation, how would this have played out differently? So part of my campaign, I'm looking at a couple different groups of people in the state who I'm trying to reach. And part of it is the political class, and part of it is the electoral reform community and the media that talks about politics. I want these folks to be exposed to how things could be different in this way, because we need to, like you brought up before about single payer universal health care.
Right.
We would have a different public policy debate and process if we had a more fair, inclusive electoral system. So we really need people who are working for social change to start seeing how their change could be empowered by these kind of electoral reforms. And that's what my campaign is trying to do. And it is doing it. I'd like to scale it up 100 times, but look, I've talked with both people who are in the state legislature, the political elite. I've also talked to people in Adelanto or Indio, to communities who are just grassroots working class communities.
Rural communities, right.
And these ideas are appealing. So our Green Party platform has a strong emphasis on proportional representation and ranked choice voting.
Mm-hmm.
And we just have to keep putting it out there more and more and get it. Remember, now, I'm not a big fan of term limits. I think term limits take away voter choice, and they're usually in places where you have the single seat winner take all district system, which just favors incumbents. Countries that have proportional representation don't need term limits. But the movement for term limits that kind of reached its apex in the early 90s took many years before it got to the point where they started having success. We're in that early phase now with proportional representation.
Right.
But for example, ranked choice voting. And here's one of the ways that we're going to succeed with this. Ranked choice voting is where you can rank all the candidates, and if your first choice doesn't win, your vote goes to your second choice, third choice. So for example, in a presidential election, you could have ranked Jill Stein first as a Green Party candidate, then maybe you rank the Democrat number 2, and you don't have any of these sort of spoiler issues. Well, this is an interesting concept, but how do you get it in play? It started in play because we've got it in play in cities. So San Francisco uses it, Alameda County uses it, Minneapolis uses it, St. Paul uses it, Santa Fe, New Mexico is going to it this year, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the movement for using these more fair, inclusive voting systems starts on the municipal level. People get used to using it on the municipal level. They see that it works, and then they're willing to try it on a higher level. The state of Maine is going to be using ranked choice voting for all of its state and federal offices in 2018. And now it's going to be in place on a state level. So we're already, I think, in that first third of the movement to have more inclusive electoral reform. We've introduced the idea. It's starting to be in place in a few places. We're seeing that it works out fine. We're seeing that it produces stable representative government. And I think we'll just grow from there.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up Maine. It's interesting that we kind of segued in that, because I just put up the website that ranked choice voting supporters say they have enough signatures to force the new vote. In other words,
yes,
it's starting to everybody. Here's the thing about the Green Party, and I know we spoke about this. There are a lot of things the Green Party wants to do, and they're fantastic, and they can really bring us up to the 21st century of what's really going on proportionally, and the way our country is moving economically, socially, in every aspect. We need this party to start to do the things that it's saying it's doing, but we need other people to join. The thing is the message. The message that comes out. There's a lot you're talking about, and everybody gets that. But the thing is the summaries, the talking points, the narratives, like I was talking before, everybody's been using the same thing for a long time with these other parties. These are branding. It's all branding in their head. So we have to rebrand. My question is, my final question to you is, how are we going to get our message out so it's not confusing and so it makes sense? Because a lot of people are so used to the same old. They're just appeased with what's going on. How do we break them in and get them to open up to these ideas? That's a big question out there.
See, one of the Green Party is in 100 countries around the world. We have representation on the state and federal level in dozens of countries where there are systems of proportional representation. So in those countries, people have a good chance of getting elected as Greens. And what happens then is the higher level of opportunity and professionalism draws more people who are green, who have marketing experience, who are professionals. We're a party today of activists, the Green Party, of people who have decided that despite the problems with our current electoral system, they're still going to be green and try and build something from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
We would grow in capacity by 100-fold under a proportional representation system. And the people who know how to do what you're saying, the people who are professional about boiling down a 20-minute speech into a 30-second ad,
Soundbite,
would be
yeah.
soundbite. They would be working for us. And then one of the corollaries with this is, for example, in the German system, the public financing isn't just about candidates, but it's also for the parties so that they can run more democratically and not be dependent on big corporate money. So let's say that you get a certain percentage of the vote, then you get a proportional amount of money for your party to run your party and your campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
So in that system, the German Greens are able to hire great graphic people, great media people, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
with that public financing, and then to hone their message and get it out there. So there's a real interconnection between your electoral potential and the type of people who you attract. Now, we don't have that today, so part of what our strategy has to be in the Green Party is to run locally where we can win. We've had in California over 350 California Greens who've been elected to municipal and county office
Mm-hmm.
since our party was founded. That does show that we have not only good ideas, but that we can govern. That then does attract more talent over time as well.
I think we can. It looks like you do have the ability to do it. Mike, I heard you over in Irvine. It was impressive. It was great to be there. That was like my third meeting that I've ever been to. The only other person that's impressed me speaking, honestly, is Jill Stein. So I got to tell you right now, you're kicking ass.
Right. Thank you so much.
Taking no prisoners. And that's the other thing that I wanted to talk about, and then we'll go because the time's moving on. Okay, so the Green Party, we're known peace and freedom, and we're all a bunch of tree huggers. But this is what I'm telling people. You damn right I'm hugging a tree. I may even hump that tree. That's how green I am, God damn it. You know, proud and green and loud. You know, and I think that's someplace, what do you think about us kind of just being, well, not overly aggressive, but I mean, just being more stern and more proud to be who we are, because I really believe we're the future. We have to be I don't see any other option out there, honestly.
If the planet is going to have a future for human beings and millions of other species, we're going to have a more green lifestyle. It's just by definition, that's the case. And the reality is, the green movement, which really caught legs in the 1980s and spawned the green political parties around the planet, is still in the early years. And as our species evolves, remember, there's a reason that there's a Green Party in 100 countries. It is a global response of our species to our unsustainability and lack of justice as a lifestyle, as a species. You're seeing similar responses. We're in most of the countries in Africa, we're in most of the countries in Europe, South America, etc. So it's something that goes beyond any individual country. It is a response, a Gaian sort of response in a sense, to how we're not living in tune with the rest of the planet. It's important to remember that green doesn't just mean environment. Our economics, an ecological economics that internalizes the environmental damage of goods and services so that doing the ecological thing is more profitable and doing the damaging thing is less profitable, that's good economics.
Yeah.
So the Green Party actually has something to offer on a lot of those levels.
I've been impressed since day one. I'm just saying. I do believe that we need to seize the moment now. I'm doing whatever I can. I've got to go through the process. I understand. We'll find ways to make it quicker and faster to bring more people in. You know what I mean? The more people we can bring in, the more powerful we can become, like ants in the moving A Bug's Life. You know, it's grasshoppers who needs ants. Ants don't need grasshoppers. You know what I'm saying? So the more we can unite and come together, and I think that's hugely important. So hey, is there anything else you want to say? Because I'm gonna give you this little video for yourself to give people.
Sure. I mean, I'll just close. Look, I'm running on a democracy bill of rights for the state, voter choice, clean money, election integrity, and a vote for me is a vote for a democracy bill of rights. The reality is, under California's top 2 primary system, only 2 candidates advance to the November election. The incumbent, the Democratic incumbent, Alex Padilla, is certainly going to advance to the November general election. Now think about voting for me, putting me on a stage with him, and being involved in candidate forum and debate in November during the whole fall on these kind of issues. How exciting would that be for democracy in California?
Fucking huge. It'd be gigantic.
Well, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I would have a party. We'd be watching it here on a party with all the people that come on here. By the way, you're always welcome back. This is a great place to hang out and vent. Let everybody know that we're just starting this up. I'm going to start doing a once a month. It's called the California Green Party News Vine that I'm going to start doing through Montauk, a little segment. And actually, Steve Carrera, do you know who that is?
I don't.
Okay, well, he's running for some city council member, 21st something, but he's going to be helping me. And
Steve Correa.
Huh?
Steve Correa.
Correa. I said, oh, sorry, Steve. But anyway, so Steve Correa is going to be, him and I are doing that. We're reaching out to the 58 counties, getting information so we can put people, Greens, in front of the cameras between the rally and the camera, between the event and the camera, between the food drive and the camera. You see what I'm saying?
Fantastic.
Everybody just getting more exposure. Branding, marketing. Sorry, we got to do something. We got to get ourselves out there. I'll be wearing a hula skirt with a coconut bra just to get the attention of everybody. I can do that on Polynesian. I can do that on Polynesian. This is just water. This is just water. This is just water. But anyway, hey, thank you so much. I showed everybody. Can you see the webs? Can you see us on the? Can you see my face at all?
I don't have that window open, but I'll certainly
well, you can see it on YouTube. I'm showing everybody you in your nice gray suit. It's got the California license. Says Feinstein. Oh, here's the biggest question: are you related to Dianne Feinstein?
No, not since the Garden of Eden. And I'm California's other Feinstein.
There, you're the real Feinstein.
Thank you.
Because the other one disappeared. The other one just got taken over by demons or something. Hey, well, listen, thank you so much for coming on. It was fantastic. I just got to say, I'm very stoked that I'm able to help. I just know that I'm doing the right thing. And it's just exciting to be a part of the party. And it's just exciting to be able to help all you guys.
Well, you're very welcome. We're happy to have you.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay, you guys, hey, aloha. Let's give a big aloha to Shaka to everybody. Thank you all for coming on.
Aloha.
I'll probably restart the show in a little bit. This is for the forum. You're welcome to stay, or you can go, up to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Aloha. Thank you, sir.